Okay, moving on to the team that I have finishing in ninth place in the Big 12 for the upcoming season. That would be Jamie Dixon and his TCU Horned Frogs. And Jamie Dixon is actually going to be entering his fifth season as the head coach of TCU. And I think overall, Jamie Dixon has done a pretty good job since he's gotten to TCU, and I feel like the average college basketball fan doesn't always realize just how hard of a job TCU is. And I feel like last year with TCU, they had some flashes, they had some positives, but especially during non-conference play, they were just never able to get that big-time quality win. But then in Big 12 play, they finally get the win over Texas Tech, and I think that win kind of raised a little bit of a pressure point off their back. And I feel like I remember after that game, I said to myself, okay, maybe TCU could go from here. They got some young players, but unfortunately, they went 1-7 over the next month, and 6 of the 7 losses were by double digits. And in the Big 12, a losing streak isn't just forgivable, it's expected, but I feel like you need to be able to know the difference between a brief skid and just a big-time meltdown, and I feel like TCU last year kind of had that meltdown, and they hit rock bottom. They bottomed out in a rematch against Texas Tech on February 10th, and the final score was 88-42. So I think that tells you really all you need to know about that game. And Jamie Dixon did have some nice wins. They beat West Virginia and Baylor at home, but they finished 7-11 and 16-16 overall. And that was probably Jamie Dixon's worst season since he became the head coach of TCU. And to make matters worse, Kendrick Davis, a guy that in the TCU program they were very high on, he transfers to SMU last summer, and that was just something that TCU really was never able to recover from. And Davis is a good young player with a bunch of potential, and I feel like a lot of TCU fans kind of pegged him as the next Alex Robinson or the next Jalen Fisher, the guy that could be that next TCU point guard while playing for Jamie Dixon and be successful. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But going to their team this year, the first thing that stands out is even though they are not the most talented team in the Big 12, they do have some players, including the inside-outside duo of R.J. Nebhart and Kevin Samuel. Both of these guys were double-digit scorers last year, and I do think if you're TCU, you're going to think, oh, I have TCU ninth place in the Big 12. That just means they have no hope and there's no optimism for them for the upcoming season. I do like that 1-2 punch of Samuel and Nembhard. Not every team in college basketball, let alone the Big 12, has a 1-2 combo as good as that. I just think TCU is going to need other guys to step up. And Kevin Samuel's a guy I feel like he gets easily forgotten about because he doesn't really have that big moment on a national stage, but he averaged a double-double last year. Nebhart was very good and could keep the leap going, hopefully. And this is a guy who, as a redshirt sophomore, averaged 12-4, but he struggled a little bit with efficiency. So you have those two guys to build around. But other than that, looking at TCU, this is a pretty unproven group to me. Jamie Dixon took all of these grad transfers last year to fill holes with Eric Greer and Dennis, and it wasn't enough to lift them anywhere near the NCAA tournament, and that was with Desmond Bane, who was one of the 2 or 3 best players in the Big 12, and he was averaging 16-6-4, and I think next week in the NBA draft, he could be a first-round pick. It is time for some of these guys to develop, and one of them has to be PJ Fuller. This is a guy who I project to start this year, but he only averaged 6 points a game, 2 rebounds a game, and an assist and a half per game, and this is a kid that is a former top 100 recruit, and when you're a school like TCU, let's face facts, you aren't really getting top 100 recruits to come to your program that often, and last year, PJ Fuller was a little bit disappointing. He was a sophomore last year, and this year as a junior, his third year in the system, his third year playing for Jamie Dixon. If I'm a TCU fan, he's a player that I'm really hopeful could hopefully just take a step forward. And Deontay Smith is another one. I really like him. He's going to get a little more of an opportunity this year. Looking at the bench for TCU, Taron Todd, the redshirt freshman, Taryn Frank, maybe we could see something from these guys. And all of these guys have come together. They bring in also Kevin Easley, who averaged 14-7 and shot 40% from 3 as a freshman. He has really good size as a forward who was playing for Chattanooga in the Big South. So he's a good player. I think he could be a high-level impact transfer. But last year, the bottom line is this. TCU is 7-12 in the Big 12. They lose their best player by far, and they don't really have a replacement for him on the roster. So when you're projecting TCU and how they look for this upcoming season, I think hopefully the surrounding guys get better, but the question is, does TCU, the team, get better without Desmond Bane? Just because Fuller and Nebhart and Samuel improve a little bit, does that mean TCU is automatically going to jump the team last year without Desmond Bane? I think that just shows you how important I think Desmond Bane is to this TCU team, and I feel like TCU at best right now, to me, looks like an NIT team. Fuller and Farabello will be their starting 1 and 3 combination, and I think both of them will need to take a little bit of a step forward if TCU really wants to improve as a team. As I said, Fuller, former top 100 recruit. Farabello, who's going to be the starting point guard for TCU this year, he's a former top 125 recruit, and each of them played around 20 minutes per game last year and didn't really hit it off. But I think now as sophomores with some more experience, you could hope they could break out, in which case you have, I think, a pretty solid starting 5. Farabello is a good passer. Nebhart's a good shooter. You have Easley and Fuller, who could provide you with good rebounding and good size, and that group fits together pretty well and would have some solid shooting if guys make the jump with Farabello as well, who actually shot the ball pretty well last year, and hopefully Nebhart and Fuller, their shooting numbers could improve. Now, the bench for TCU is a little bit uncertain as well. One other guy I didn't really talk about much is Jalen Ledee. He was pretty hyped up after coming in, transferring from Ohio State, but the bottom line is last year in limited action for TCU, he wasn't really good. He's going to have a little bit of an opportunity here to step up and be one of the first men coming off the bench. He has experience playing in the Big Ten. And then also Charles O'Bannon, who did nothing really at USC over 3 years. He's a former top 20 recruit, really high recruit, and he's really done nothing at USC, so I'm curious to see what he's going to be able to do at TCU. And also, they bring in Terran Frank, the freshman, 6'8". I think eventually he's going to be a very good player. I just don't know what exactly he's going to bring to the TCU program this year. Now, TCU, once again, I think their starting 5 actually fits together pretty nicely. Farabello, that's a really good point guard. Nebhart is a scorer. He averaged 12 points per game last year. Hopefully he takes that jump to like 15, maybe 16, and he really develops into your top alpha dog. PJ Fuller, former top 75 recruit, athletic, 6'4". They need him to shoot it better. They need him to become a little bit more of a consistent impact scorer, and if he could jump his scoring average from 6 to like 11 or 12, I think that's exactly what TCU needs. Kevin Easley's a transfer, albeit it was at Chattanooga, but he averaged 14 points a game. He has good size at 6'7", so that helps. And then Kevin Samuel, a guy who basically averaged a double-double last year. I think that's a good starting 5. They're just going to need guys like Smith and Ledee and Frank and O'Bannon to step up off the bench and just give them some kind of consistent spark, or else I think this TCU team can be in big trouble, because the bottom line is this. Desmond Bane was probably one of the 2 or 3 best players in the history of the TCU basketball program, and he was the winningest player in the history of the program. And unfortunately, he was not able to lift TCU out of the bottom of the Big 12 gutter last year. The Frogs were really an established guard group, which I think is just very important to the TCU offense. They were at their best when they had guys like Alex Robinson, when they had guys like Jalen Fisher just doing work and carving up opposing defenses on a nightly basis, and bearing transformative leaps from Nebhart or Farabello or Fuller. TCU is going to have a little bit of a tough time climbing back into the NCAA tournament picture, but there is some potential here. I do think Jamie Dixon is a good coach. There are much worse coaches in college basketball than him. I think he's a guy that always runs a pretty solid program, may not be the best coach in college ball, but always is consistent and gets the job done. So shout out to Jamie Dixon and TCU. Unfortunately, I just think the Big 12, especially at the top, is too good. If they were in another league, maybe they would compete, but this is just a really tough job, and that is why I have TCU projected to come in 9th.